The Citi Strata Premier is an ideal one-card setup that you may not choose. Let me explain. When talking about a one-card setup in the industry, there are very few cards that can compete with the Citi Strata Premier. A few that come to mind are the Chase Sapphire Preferred, the Capital One Venture Rewards card, and you can potentially make the argument for the Amex Gold as well. But there's a different persona set for each of those cards. The Citi Strata Premier is a workhorse card that has strong multipliers across multiple categories like travel, groceries, gas, etc. And all of this for a small $95 annual fee. Even though the card sounds great on paper as a one-card setup or a part of the Citi trifecta, there are very few people who will choose this card, and it all comes down to brand equity. But in this video, I'll try and explain why this might be the right one-card setup for you. Let's start with the definition of brand equity. Brand equity, according to Google, is the value of a brand determined by the consumer's perception of its quality and desirability. With the definition out of the way, let's contrast Citi with Amex in terms of brand equity. How you feel about American Express, they've been able to establish a brand equity of appealing to affluent customers and offering premium cards. Now that's not to say that American Express credit cards are better than Citi credit cards. But what it does establish is, in marketing parlance, the difference between pull and push of a consumer product. So in the case of American Express, you'll have more customers coming towards American Express organically, whereas in the case of Citi, unless you understand their core product offerings or are already part of their banking ecosystem, you're probably not going to be drawn in unless you're marketed to. Let's get some of the basics out of the way. The Citi Strata Premier is currently running an elevated bonus offer of 75,000 points after you spend $4,000 in the first 3 months of card ownership. Additionally, you get 10x back when you book hotels, car rentals, or attractions through the Citi portal. You get 3x back on a bunch of categories like air travel, hotel expenses, supermarket, restaurants, and recently added EV charging. And you get 1x back on everything else. The card also comes with a $100 annual benefit on any hotel that's booked through the Citi travel portal for $500 or more. The few times I've tried to use their services, I've found their prices to be slightly higher than other travel aggregators like Expedia or Booking.com. So if I were you, I would definitely do some research before booking through their travel portal. The card also revamped some of the travel protections associated with the credit card. This includes standard protection like trip interruption protection, as well as delay and cancellations. And last, but definitely not the least for us in the credit card community, are point transfers. But we'll talk about that slightly later in the video. With that foundation laid, we can talk about why this can be a part of a one-card setup for you. Now, generally people who are looking at a one-card setup value simplicity above everything else. If you fit that persona, irrespective of whether you take multiple trips in a year or if you take a single trip in a year, this can be the card for you. And here are a couple of reasons why. Number one is that you get 1 cent per point for every thank you reward point that you turn into cashback or gift cards. Now, if cashback is all you use your card for, then there are other cards in the ecosystem that might be a better fit for you. One of the cards that comes to mind is the US Bank Altitude Reserve card. But within its competitive set, like the Chase Sapphire Preferred or the Capital One Rewards card, the maximum amount of money you're going to get back in terms of cashback is 1 cent per point. So that's not really a differentiator. Let's move on to point number 2, which is if you use your card for travel as well as cashback. Now, the fiercest competition when it comes to travel within this space is going to be from the Chase Sapphire Preferred. Now, there are a few reasons for that. Number one is that you can use the Chase travel portal to extract 1.25 cent per point for every ultimate reward point that you've earned. So that is 25% higher than what the Citi Strata Premier can give you. Additionally, the Chase Sapphire Preferred also has a $50 credit that's fairly easy to use if you use their travel portal to make a hotel booking. That begs the question, why would this be a better fit for someone than the Chase Sapphire Preferred in any scenario? Well, I have an answer for that. And it comes down to the multipliers. The Chase Sapphire Preferred gets you 3x back on dining and 2x back on travel. Now, while that's not bad, if you are someone who uses a single card setup or uses a couple of credit cards within your wallet, you would need stronger multipliers to actually earn more points. And that can sometimes offset the 25% more that you get through the Chase travel portal, especially if you take 1 to 2 trips a year. That's where I think the balance of these two cards comes into play. Let's take the example of an individual who spends on 4 categories during the year: travel, dining, groceries, and gas station. And for simplicity's sake, let's just assume they spend $500 every single month on each of these categories. That's a sum total of $6,000 in each of these categories over the course of the year. If you are someone who uses the Citi Strata Premier card, you earn a sum total of $6,000 into 3x into 4. So that's a sum total of 72,000 points during the course of the year. Whereas if you're someone who uses the Chase Sapphire Preferred card, you earn a sum total of 42,000 points, given the slightly weaker multipliers of the Chase Sapphire Preferred. Now, if you were to use all of these points towards travel through the Chase travel portal, you'd still be earning 42,000 points multiplied by 1.25 cent per point, which computes to $525. Whereas in the case of the Citi Strata Premier, even if you valued those points at 1 cent per point, you're earning $720. Now, if you take into account that the Chase Sapphire Preferred subsidizes the annual fee on the credit card with a $50 hotel credit and add that to the value generated with the points, you'd still be at $575 versus the $720 that you get from the Citi Strata Premier. And that's the kind of balance I'm talking about. Now, the scenario is going to be different for different people, but I wanted to flag that to you in case you're doing the math for yourself. Which brings us to something that I talked about earlier, which is the Citi transfer partners. And again, this will help me make a stronger argument as to why the Citi Strata Premier can still be a very strong one-card setup for you, even if you don't use it for cashback or use their travel portal. But instead, use those points to transfer over to travel partners. If you talk about the airlines, you have transfer partners like Virgin Atlantic, Flying Blue, Avianca Life Miles, as well as Singapore KrisFlyer Miles. And on the hotel side, you have Choice Privilege Hotels, Accor, as well as Preferred Hotels and Resorts. Now, in the recent past, I've talked about how you can generate elevated value by transferring over your points either to Flying Blue or Virgin Atlantic. But let me talk about how you can generate elevated value by transferring over your Citi Thank You points to hotel partners. We'll focus on the Preferred Hotels and Resorts. And if you take the example of the Boston Harbor Hotel, where we need 150,000 points at the bare minimum to stay a night, and that does not even include taxes and fees, which is generally about $50. For a 2-night stay, you'll have to shell out 300,000 points. But the good thing is, Citi Thank You points transfer over 1:4 to the Preferred Hotels and Resorts. So to book a 2-night stay for 300,000 points, all you have to transfer over is about 75,000 points. If you look at the retail price of 2 nights at this property, it's about $1,433. And if you did the cent per point calculation, it comes up to about 1.77, which in my opinion is pretty decent. So in conclusion, if you're looking for a one-card setup that solves your cashback as well as travel problems, gives you very strong multipliers, has decent airline as well as hotel partners that you can transfer over points to, you should definitely consider the Citi Strata Premier card. Do I think it's better than Chase Sapphire Preferred? Well, that depends. Now, if you travel a fair bit and you like staying at Hyatt properties, the Chase Sapphire Preferred may be the way to go because that's the only card currency outside of Bill Rewards that transfers over to Hyatt. But if you're a little more flexible in the hotel brands that you stay at and the airline partners that you choose, the Citi Strata Premier also presents a very strong case. If you're in the market to apply for a card, check out my referral link below. Using that helps out the channel. And as always, I'll see you in the next one.